Welcome to the Marketing Meeting podcast. My guest today is Tom Denford, CEO and co-founder of IDComs. IDComs is a global management consultancy specializing in media and advertising. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate joining the marketing meeting because we love being in marketing meetings. So thank you.
The reason that I started this name was we used to have at Nike. I used to work at Nike for long years, and we used to have these Tuesday sessions. And Tuesday mornings were dedicated to the marketing meeting where everyone was talking.
Yeah.
So it just started from there, and then at the beginning I was recording on Tuesdays, and then I said, I mean, like. Only I know the reason to that, so there's nothing special about Tuesdays, actually. The website of IDComs opens with the header, Brands Deserve Better Media.
Yes.
And I know that you talk a lot about the quality of media nowadays. What does better media mean for you and your team?
That's a good question. Well, when we say brands deserve better media, that's just acknowledging that for most marketers, in your marketing meetings, you don't really want to be talking about media. You want to be talking about brands, and you want to be talking about your consumers, and you want to be talking about your products and how you serve the needs of those consumers. And in the last decade, marketers probably feel they've spent too much time worrying about media. It's a huge distraction. It's become really complicated. And sadly, it's kind of full of more risk actually these days, and a lot of money involved in media. And so, as you said, we're a management consultancy that advises brands on media and advertising. And we feel that's our mission to bring to a CMO or a marketer, and that motivates my team, is that we can help your brands get a better result in media. And what we mean by that really is just it's more effective. You know, we want your brand to be disproportionately more effective than any other brand in its category in media, which is a big part of your investment. It's a big headache that you want to go away. And so if we we call it untangling and de-risking. So if we can untangle media for you just to make it transparent and so you can see actually what's happening, remove some of the waste and the risk, then you've got more marketing firepower from your media budget, and that should help grow your brand. So better is a very broad, that is a quite subjective measure, but better acknowledges that it's not good enough and that actually it can be a lot better. And what we like about that phrase particularly as well is that it's a kind of binding narrative for the whole industry. You know, media's become very, very fractured. Brands accusing their agencies of lack of transparency, and agencies kind of fighting with publishers about these kind of things. And it's not the sweet harmony that we want in the industry. And so we try and remind everybody as well that we're all in service of a common thing. We're all in service of the brands that we love. And that sounds a bit kind of woo-woo, but like we have to remind ourselves, like, let's just come to the table because we're just trying to serve brands at the end of the day. And that should be a uniting force. So if we can get everybody together, understand each other's point of view a bit better, maybe we can all work together to give brands a better result from media. And that's really what they want, so that the brand managers can go off and do far more important things.
So in that case, you are in between the media agencies and the brands. So you make sure that they just hold hands correctly. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, yeah. I mean, we don't put ourselves in between because we don't want to be in between the marketer and anybody really.
Yeah.
Their relationship with their agencies or any external partners. So we look at not just media agencies, we look at creative agencies, we look at technology and some direct to publisher relationships between brands and publisher. And our ambition is not to get in the middle of those, but actually just to make sure that we construct highly productive and profitable relationships between those two. That's just really transparent and in service of the brand.
So you see yourself closer to the brand. That case?
Yeah, we work for marketers. So our business is solely focused on the marketer. We maintain good understanding and constructive dialogue with all of their suppliers. So all of the different media and creative agencies. but our customer is the marketer, is the CMO or the brand manager or the procurement lead within the marketing org of an advertiser.
I'll come up to that part of, the agency pitch and so on, because we got connected through the agency pitch, through one of your posts. But I'm going to ask a broader question now, because, for example, right now, based on Nielsen, the median age of TV is 70 years old, and for prime TV, 65. Probably the numbers are around this. I mean, I'm not sure it's exactly 70, but where are young people now?
Where are they? Well, I mean, media is different now. It's fragmented. These audiences we talk about are fragmented across lots of different types of media and different channels. And for the last 20 years, the internet has enabled that to happen, is that people can find, more niche communities. Essentially, we all used to watch the same TV programs at the same time on the same TV channels or a select few TV channels. Of course, now there's hundreds or thousands of different places that you can spend your media time or consuming different content. Now, that should be a good thing for a marketer ultimately, because as people gather around particular types of content, if you're really into, I love sailing. So if I read sailing magazines or go on sailing websites or follow, accounts on social media that are to do with sailing, I'm there to, you can sell me sailing things, right? So it's a really good way of understanding audiences, their media behaviors when they're fragmented out. That should be a really good thing. Actually, it's quite difficult. It has been quite difficult for brands to do that, which some of the complexities that we've probably come on to talk about. But that's been the major change, is that where we spend our time is just fragmented into these far smaller pieces. And so there's a lot more analysis required to understand how people are consuming what type of content. And as a brand manager, that segmentation, media segmentation, and understanding who to target as potential valuable customers is a big industry now in itself, doing an analysis of media consumption data and trying to link that back to your target customers. But it should in theory be more effective, because we can target people around their areas and topics of interest.
Some people say that, especially lately, as I'm reading the news around podcasts and marketing and election, and there's I think I've read 3 news about that the new age, the young people, they are consuming podcasts, not TV or not anything else, which I would doubt, because that type of a big generalization is too big. You cannot assume that everyone is listening to the podcast. What's your thought on that in terms of medium, like other than TV or prime TV? Or streaming platforms. Where do you see brands putting more money behind right now? Is it podcasts, which I doubt?
Well, I think after this, more brands will be putting money into podcasts, I hope. No, but you're right. The consumption of podcast media has grown hugely in recent years, and it's a really significant now advertising platform. Go back 5 years, it was kind of seen as somewhat of a niche, and you'd have brand mentions and maybe some podcast hosts would be trialing product or recommend certain things. But now these are reaching large audiences, regular and predictable and sustainable audiences, which is really what the brands want. What they want are scale audiences to reach lots of people in predictable and safe ways, and that's podcast has grown really nicely into that space. It's really just radio, but a bit extra. I mean, it's really the idea. If you think, I talk to a lot of marketers sometimes about actually what types of media, what they do. Podcast, I really love, because it's a very intimate type of media. It's what we would call like a me media. When I'm listening, it's just me listening.
Yeah.
Like maybe you grew up listening to the radio, where you listen to your favorite station on a radio station. The host of that is talking to you. I know that lots of other people are listening, but it's a very intimate thing. And you may have like headphones on, or you're listening whilst you're in the car or something like that. It's normally a media that's consumed individually on your terms, and typically around something that you like, a topic you like, or a host that you like, or somebody telling a story that you like. And that's a really lovely environment to put your brand in.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that can be activated on podcast is beautifully creative, because you can have on-air mentions, which are always really effective, because you have a relationship with the host that's talking to you. And when they talk about a brand, it comes with an extra special wrapping of endorsement. So those can be hugely effective. And just running just traditional ads like pre, during, or post a podcast is an understanding of the listener that that's how you get content. You know, we are used, and we do accept ads running before the things that we want, or in the things that we want, because we understand that we get those things for free.
Yeah.
As a result. So it's a very pure type of media, and I'm not surprised that it's grown. It's a very on-demand version of radio.
Yeah.
And so it's got a particular feel. I think it's interesting for marketers to really think about podcasting as a really powerful platform to now get reach, and maybe more impactfully. Well, it's different, but it's different to TV. But as it potentially is impactful as TV. I mean, that's why it's grown so much.
When I think about the type of the format of the content, everybody is talking now, it's video. You have to really come up with video ads, or video as a format is on the rise. And we were used to creating ads for printed media, like 10 years ago, let's say. Now we already got used to creating content for video, a type of a video format. Of course, video was with the TV also, it was in our world. But now podcast is completely a new format. Well, because considering that radio was quite small 10 years ago. Then I'm just thinking about the fact that brands now need to learn how to create right formats for audio as well, because it's a completely different world. At one of your posts, it's got my attention, so I'm going to read the first few lines, and then we can talk about the media agencies' pitches and so on. Mm-hmm. It says, "Are we living in a city of discounts? Who set the low bar for the media quality? How did we end up giving up on context, placement, environment, partnerships as important media concentrations?" I think you talk about the race to the bottom and then reversing it to the race to the top. Can you talk a bit about this?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is all in the spirit that brands deserve better media. And I think one of the things that we talk to marketers often about, because often the start point is, where are we and where do we need to get to? And often the blunt truth to a marketer is, where you are right now is that you probably don't have enough visibility of what's happening in your media. Mm-hmm. It's really opaque and complicated. And for most marketers, what they spend on media, I mean, for those listeners that are not marketers, that haven't touched the kind of the budgeting challenges of marketing, is that 60, 70, sometimes 80% of your money is in media. And it's typically the area they know least about, but it's the largest single investment. And for a lot of companies, it's the largest, or one of the largest single investments companies make across all of their costs. So media is really important, but the starting point is it's generally not great. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that it's so complicated and they don't really understand and they can't see what's necessarily happening. And secondly, they're working with a very complex supply chain that really is trying to do one thing, and that's deliver cheaper and cheaper media. So most brands have been trying to treat media as a commodity, really, and trying to buy as many media impressions as they can for the least possible cost. And when we talk about the old-fashioned media, you tended to kind of know what you were buying. Now it's got so complicated, you often don't know what you're buying. You don't see it. You don't have a sense of it. You just see it on a spreadsheet or a report. And that opens up lots of risks to very low quality media, fraudulent impressions, These are counterfeit impressions, basically. So, websites that will take your money and then issue hundreds or thousands of banners on a particular site. For example, we have these phenomena called made-for-advertising websites, which have a very, very heavy ad load, what we call ad load, which is a little bit of content and tons of ads around it. You've probably seen these kind of things, and lots of things pop up. Yeah. You have to keep clicking to refresh the page. These sites are really just designed to take advertisers' dollars, and they're not effective at driving any kind of actual customer response. So the marketer, beware, a lot of your money is being wasted. The reason that I kind of wrote this post is because as an industry, we've become a bit obsessed with trying to get under this low bar of cost. And I think some things are to blame. I think one of the things is the traditional kind of audit community of media have just turned media into this commodity that you have to kind of measure in terms of how cheap it is. And that's the only thing. And marketers have been told that cheaper media is better media. But like anything in life, you get what you pay for. So if you continually want cheaper media, then the quality of that has to degrade. And the way it's degraded is that there are more ads on pages. Ads are loading behind other pages. There are bots that create ad clicks on banners. So not even real people. And marketers are buying this stuff. They're paying for this because they want cheaper. What we want to do is, and what we try to do as a business, is shift in the marketer's mind this idea that you have to get media under a low bar of cost and set a high bar of quality, which might cost a bit more, but we have to show and demonstrate to the business that that's effective at driving some kind of outcome. And then if you can show that and you get the marketing organization thinking more in that way, then you're more likely to continue to invest in media that drives an outcome in the business, and you'll see the impact of that. So that was really the purpose of the post.
Because when I think about the discussions that I do with clients, or the discussions back in the days when I was working for a brand and we used to buy ads, the discussion starts always with the return on investment per ad. So, okay, how many people saw it, and then what's the price per user, per viewer? If you want to twist this and we say that we would like to go to the quality, what's the starting point there? I mean, rather than starting the discussion, okay, look how cheap I got views or impressions with, what should be the narrative from the marketer's side?
Yeah. Well, I love the way you use the word narrative, because often it starts with that. And if we're sat with a CMO or a marketer and they ask that question, what's the start point? We say the start point is you. Okay. And from the marketer, you set the tone of the rest of the marketing organization, and then your narrative carries through the whole supply chain. Okay. Brands invest collectively over $1 trillion a year each year in advertising. $1 trillion. That puts advertising in the top 20 countries ranked by GDP. That's a lot of money. And about 60 to 70% of that is media. Okay. And how that gets applied and deployed comes back to you as the CMO. Okay. What standards and what narrative will you set for media? Because if the narrative is it should be as cheap as possible, then that pervades across this entire complex landscape. And everybody is trying to get the CMO a better, cheaper media, right? Cheaper deal of media. If the CMO says, actually, we care about media, we care where our brands show up in the world. Really important. You have to tell people that you care about media and you care where your brand shows up in the world, because media is where your brand is going to show up. Okay. Media is how your brand behaves in the world. So it's actually really important. So, but you don't want to spend too much time getting into the details as a CMO. You just want to know that there's less risk and that it's working as hard as possible. So if you can get the CMO to say and be prepared to say, publicly or it's within their organization and direct this long tail supply chain, actually, we care about standards here. Okay. That goes a long, long way of changing the behavior of a big, long supply chain. Because the pervading and the conventional wisdom is that media needs to be as cheap as possible to keep marketers happy. But that's, if you sit with a marketer and you say, like, here are the implications of that, is buying counterfeit impressions, maybe funding, disinformation, misinformation. You're pulling budgets out of funding quality journalism. You're buying I mean, this is where your money goes, right? It goes into the hands of crooks who are selling fraudulent advertising. Marketing budget is flowing into these places they probably don't want. Your ads are showing up on websites and around videos that you don't want them to be associated with.
Yeah.
So if you care more, you tell everybody that you care more, you set a higher standard for everybody. And then often companies like us will come in and actually set specific guidelines that everybody can follow, that are quality thresholds. And then we forensically measure every dollar that's spent, every impression that's acquired. And then we grade it according to those quality thresholds. So you can continually see what's the poorest quality or the poorest performing media inventory, cut that, reinvest it back in the brands. And so you're continually optimizing and doing better work. And that's where it starts. But it has to start right at the top with the marketer.
I find it really interesting, especially, marketers spend a lot of time and budget and also thinking to produce good quality content. Well, not everyone, of course, but like we are obsessed with the, creative, with how it looks and how it's gonna be, what's the copy. But then you deliver that copy, you don't mind delivering this copy or like this visual, this ad, beautiful ad to very low, quality media channels. So I feel that as much as we consider creating good content and good ads, I think it's important that we deliver them to the right people, to the right places, which is like the narrative doesn't start with the price. The narrative starts with who's going to see this and which platforms are we going to show this. Then in that case, like for a brand to do media investment, trust is very important, because you talk about fraudulent ads, about places that you get impressions, but actually it's the bot who is viewing your ad.
Yeah.
How can we solve this? I mean, like, is it right to go to the right media agency then, or what's the solution to that?
Well, yeah, it's really solvable. It's really solvable, but it comes back to this direction that a marketer must give everybody, that they care. Okay, so the whole media, when I call it the media supply chain, that is like the agencies, publishers, platforms, all the buying technology, all the different dips of ad tech that go through all the way through to kind of publishers' technology, through to publishers, and then maybe an impression or a page or an ad that your future customer may see, or your current customer may see. That's what we call the supply chain. It's grown to optimize on price. It exists to generally optimize on price, is to get you something as cheap as possible. The irony is that there are often dozens of different companies that are then touching your money through that chain, and they all take a little bit of it as well. So what gets to the end is actually what you thought. And there's some good analysis that's going on with the trade associations, kind of looking at that supply chain and where some of those losses are. And we try and guide marketers to reduce all the different touches on their money that's maybe not adding value. So right now, that supply chain is really optimized to find lower cost. And as a result, it's become pretty untransparent. If you, as a marketer, flip that and you tell your supply chain, you tell your media agency and you tell your media vendors and your publishers that you care about quality, you care where your brands show up in the world, then what happens is that whole supply chain becomes engineered around putting the right brands in the right places to reach the right people, back to what it should be. Yeah. So we can get there, and we are seeing movements towards that, and I'm optimistic that that's the way. But it's just got to start with that narrative. your media suppliers are not going to be focused on quality if you're still focused on reducing price. So you've got to first off change that narrative. Marketers have lost trust in their media supply chain, but they've lost trust because it's got so complex they don't understand it, and they often feel like they can't get a straight answer out of anybody about how it's working. And so perhaps that's why companies like us exist. We're, independent and objective observers of what's happening, and we work for them to tell them and unpack what's happening so that they can see it and maybe have a bit more confidence in what's going on. But trust is the currency of any business. And when a marketer doesn't trust with their media suppliers enough, then I think that's a problem that needs to be addressed. And it only gets addressed, like any relationship, is that you have to build trust over time, and it comes from consistent positive behavior. And so if the supply chain is more transparent, can give the marketer more visibility of where their money goes and what works and what doesn't, and they can optimize to their ambition to optimize for quality and not cost, then I'm confident over time that trust will be rebuilt. But it's really difficult at the moment because marketers being asked to now not just trust a supply chain, but also trust a supply chain with a layer of AI on top of it, which makes it more complicated. It's another layer of complexity, which is giving marketer a headache. What we find is that they tend to do one of two things, probably like most people, is that you either reach in, you lean in and you take control as a marketer. And there are some very great examples. Mark Pritchard at P&G is a leading marketer and a big advertiser, major advertiser, hugely influential. He and his organization have rolled their sleeves up. They've leaned into media complexity. They've unpacked it themselves, and they've taken control. Really, they've taken control. They've built some internal capabilities to manage media, and they've demanded, transparency and alignment of their supply chain. And there's a few other brands that are doing that, building capabilities internally, broadly taking control of media. And that's one route you can go as a marketer. The other route is to...
Before you move to the second one, can I ask a question on the first model? So for big brands, but they have then the buying power to have everything internally. You mean that everything is moved internally, meaning that between the ad till it reaches to the customer, is there any other person sitting in between the brand and the customer in their case?
Well, yeah. So where businesses have what's now broadly called in-housing, so in-housing the capabilities to plan and buy media, which is totally possible for major brands to do that now. But they have the opportunity through the technology. They're much more sophisticated internally around their data and what their brands need from media, is that they can go and buy media directly. Is there anything in between the brand and the customer? Well, yes, there is where the ad shows up. So they still need to obviously have publishers, and they may have some technology relationships, and they may have some direct vendor relationships. So they still need some external partners. It's an interesting challenge, what the role is then for the media agency. So the media agencies themselves are having to adapt and think ahead about what role they play as more advertisers decide to buy media themselves or buy it directly. So that's an interesting challenge for the media agency. But it's we're 5 or 6 years in now to this in-housing journey. I think it's a continuing trend, and I think people suggest it's some kind of pendulum swing that there's. Brands take control, then they go use agencies and they bring it back inside. We're seeing generally that it's building within brands. Most brands now, I think almost every brand I've spoken to in the last 5 years has some kind of internal capabilities for managing media. And as technology allows them to do so, particularly now AI tools, I think for media, a lot of those will be brought in-house. A lot of them will be provided by the platforms for marketers. They'll make it super easy for them to plan and buy media. themselves. So it's getting easier.
So it was the in-housing was the first path that a brand
Yeah,
can take.
yeah.
Especially, I guess this is valid for the big brands, bigger brands, larger brands. What's the second path that I cut
Well,
your word there?
you're not gonna like the second path, because the first part is just lean in and take control, take an interest, understand how it works, make some decisions. That's the
Yeah.
brands that we work with. They tend to be wanting to lean in and do something. Okay. They want to just get a bit more visibility and decide what bits they want to run, how to work with their agencies, how to raise quality and transparency. That's one route. The other route is just to ignore it and bury your head in the sand and hope it will go away and it's somebody else's problem. And there's a lot of people still doing that. Okay. So a lot of marketers might listen to this and think, okay, well, that's a problem for another day or another year, or I have a media team that does all of that, or I have an agency that does all of that. I don't have to think about it. But it's shifting the issue further down the line, kicking it into the grass, or making it somebody else's problem. So it's definitely an option. We wouldn't recommend it, because the risk there is that your competitors are better at media. 60% of your budget, 70% of your budget is going in media. If your competitors have figured out how to do it a bit better than you, if your competitors' media is more effective than you, if your competitors are wasting less money on media, then you're going to be at a disadvantage over time, because that gives them competitive advantage. It's so much money. It absolutely comes down to where your brands show up in the world, how you actually connect with people. It's fun to make the ads. Really fun to make ads, and it's great to make great ads, and you can become a great marketer and very famous making great ads. But at the end of the day, you've got to sell some stuff and you've got to change behavior. And so those great ads, your messages, your brands that you've built that we all love, they've got to reach people.
Yeah.
And media is such a simple idea that's been made incredibly complicated. And I feel sad sometimes when marketers don't find media interesting, because the principle of taking your product or your brand to customers should be very exciting. And it's sad that it's got so complex. It's such a headache that a good proportion of them just want to turn away and ignore the problem. But I think we've got to confront it, and we've got to embrace it. And it ultimately comes back to the marketer, who gets to decide, who gets to set the tone, who gets to tell everybody what's important. And they can have an oversized impact on making media better for all brands.
I feel that it's the role of a marketer. I mean, it's like the natural role of a marketer to understand media and get curious about media. It's not like a nice to have. I think it's a must have. If you are spending 60% or sometimes even 40% of your budget, then it's your responsibility and it's your job to protect that budget and to make sure that it goes to the right places.
Yeah.
Two questions here. One of them is, you mentioned about so many touch points between the brand till the customer when in terms of media buying. Since all the technologies, AI and many of the things happening, and also there's like still a race to the bottom to decrease the prices. Where do you see the future of the media agencies? I mean, are these touch points getting less, or does it require like a big change in the dynamics of how media companies structured?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two forces probably at play with media agencies. One is we touched on now, which is that more brands are taking control of media buying decisions, and some are doing increasingly doing media buying themselves, and that naturally is decreasing the scope or the influence of a media agency on brands, because they can do a lot themselves. But also the other thing at play is that media agencies have kind of got involved in the selling of media, not just the buying of media. So most media agencies, not all media agencies, because some very rightly kind of stand up and say, we don't do that at all. We just work for the brands, and we work wholly in the interest of the brands. But some media agencies have created new revenue streams by taking either unsold inventory or additional things that they can negotiate and repackaging them, and then kind of selling those on at some margin. And the margin is often undisclosed, selling those back on to their customers, to their clients, to the advertisers. And that looks like it's a win-win in a sense, because the publisher sells things that maybe they couldn't sell. The agency gets to add some value and make some money in theory, a value add. And what happens is that the advertiser can sometimes buy that media cheaper in these undisclosed ways than they could do elsewhere. So it looks like they're buying something cheaper. So we have this whole world where cheaper media is being, again, funded, but everyone's making money from it. So it seems slightly perverse, let's say, that things can be cheaper and cheaper, and we can make more money doing it. So that's created an interesting dynamic. I mean, media agencies are incredibly entrepreneurial, and they're always trying to find new ways to get, brands in front of customers. And I believe that most, or if not, almost all media agencies, there's always a few, maybe bad actors out there, but media agencies generally are working in the interests of brands. They believe in this idea that they're helping brands reach customers, and if they can find media opportunities and package them and sell them to brands, and that helps brands reach consumers cost effectively, then maybe that's not a bad thing. However, it's more lack of transparency. That's the thing. And so the marketer doesn't really know what they're buying or what they're paying. And so it's very hard to then take a judgment on, are we buying really what our brand needs? And are we paying a fair price given the impact or the quality of that? So it's an interesting moment for media agencies. I mean, I say to agency CEOs, I talk to analysts, like market analysts quite a lot, is that ultimately media agencies will have to decide long term whether they really want to be, the buyers of media or the sellers of media. I think at the moment, a lot of agencies kind of think that they can do both, and they're maybe being quite successful doing both. But then privately, the marketer is saying that's not an ideal thing, right? We don't really like the idea that the company that's supposed to be buying media is also heavily invested in selling media as well, because maybe is there a risk that they could be selling us things that we don't need?
Yeah.
Do they put things on media plans that are really things that they want to sell, or that they think that we should buy? And there's confusion there. Long term, that's not sustainable. And I think in an environment where it's easier and easier every year for marketers to build their own media management capabilities internally, so that they're buying their own media. That's a big question for agencies. Is like, what role are you going to play 5 years from now? Are you going to be a seller of media? Are you going to be a marketplace, which is a totally valid thing, but let's just be very transparent about that. Are you going to be a marketplace, or are you going to be, a consultative value add service that supports brands in achieving their ambitions, directly as an advisor, which is often really what the marketer wants from their agency.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt that a lot of brands would go in-housing the media capabilities. Well, right now at least, because then not every brand is as big as the others, like as big as P&G or some global brands. Because when you are a big brand, you have the power to buy more because you are buying more, and then you can, get better deals with like platforms like Google or some other ad platforms that you can give. So I'm thinking from the perspective of a smaller brand. So let's assume that I'm a smaller brand and I just started investing in social media ads, which is like a very small portion, and someone at the team can do that. But there's like a path that you have to take. Once you start spending some money on media, then as you grow, you would need some better hands, where then you just go to a media agency. What do you suggest for a smaller brand that is just about to start investing more in media? they just go and search for media agencies, which is not easy, or should they search for companies like you or consultants like your team? What's the path for a smaller brand?
Yeah. So the first thing is to find a media agency that's right for you.
Yeah.
And so it's quite a lot of the work that we do is helping match brands with the right agencies. And we run and design those processes on behalf of brands. And the first start of that, and if you want to do it yourself if you're a small growing brand and you don't want to work with a consulting team like ours, you can do some of this yourself, which is you just got to be really clear what you want.
Yeah.
It goes, maybe that's it's too easy start point, but really be clear what you want from an agency, because there are agencies for everybody. There's all different types and size and scales and different capabilities and expertise. And the first thing is to decide actually what you need. And really the best way to do that is to just sit for a second and just think how you work internally. Because really what you want is an agency that can support and enhance what you currently do. What we find is that we look at a lot of relationships between brands, like big and small brands and their agencies, and we find that where there are issues is either because they overlap, they're trying to both do the same kind of thing and they get in each other's way, or there's gaps in scope and there's things that drop through the cracks that not sure who's doing what. And most of the kind of dysfunction are procedural, they're operational things. And you just can't there's too much at stake here. There's a lot riding on brands and advertising. And you've got to have agencies or an agency that is really closely aligned with what you're trying to do. And then you set up a very clear scope of what the agency does and what you do, and then you can work productively together. It should be precision engineered. It's worth taking a lot of time just thinking about that. We say to marketers all the time, please do not go shopping for an agency. It's like walking into a grocery store and without any idea of what you want. You know what happens, right? You just
Exactly,
end up
yeah.
buying everything. Okay. IKEA have figured that one out very well. Right? If you don't know exactly what you want, you come back with everything. So you don't go shopping for an agency. Okay. The worst thing you can do is start by just calling agencies and just arranging all these kind of meetings, and it turns into a beauty parade and you don't exactly know what decisions you're making. So be clear what you want. And then the next stage is we typically tell a brand or help a brand understand what the criteria of evaluation should be, because normally it's a group decision. It's very rare that we work with a CMO or a marketer who says, I'm just going to choose an agency. Normally there's lots of people involved. There's brand managers involved. There's agency relationship, sometimes legal, procurement. Maybe a lot of businesses that we work with are divisional businesses. They're multinational, multi-divisional businesses, and you have stakeholders, complex stakeholder sets. But even if in a small brand, you've probably got a small marketing team and that you want people's opinion. So it's fair to the agencies participating in that you share with them how you're going to make decisions. It's really important for them to know how decisions are going to be made and who's going to be making decisions. And you need to know, right, what are we actually looking for? Agencies are really good at seducing marketers. They're really good at that. Like, they're really good at getting marketers to fall in love with them. Okay.
Yeah.
Agencies have wonderful people in them that you want to work with. And we often have your marketer go, we like all these agencies. We love all these people. Can't we just hire all of them? You can't fall in love with the individuals. You've got to really think that there are capability questions. Is, can the agency do what we want? Okay, because we've made a list of things that we want. Does this agency actually do those things? Because not all agencies do everything. Secondly, is there an alignment of culture and values? Is this our kind of company? Those things are really important. Do we feel these are our kind of people? Okay. Do they work with brands that we like or that we could recognize that are like ours? That cultural fit and alignment of values is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about in advance, like which agencies to put on a long list. And it's something that we encourage marketers to really, look out for, okay, and actually score on those things. And the third part is commercial terms, is because you can fall in love with an agency and then you think, oh, we can't afford them. And And you need to be really clear what it's going to cost, both in terms of the staffing and the fee, but also there's lots of other resources. There's increasingly technology and tools that agencies will have. And when it comes to media agencies, of course, like how and what they buy in terms of media, how good they are at negotiating. So those are the three areas: the capabilities, cultural fit, and commercial terms that we encourage marketers to think about. And if you've got a scorecard or some way of evaluating agencies around those kind of areas, then go see 3, 4, 5 agencies and then make a decision. Fall in
Yeah.
love.
And also, like, there is a lot to, like, we talked about, like, what the brands should do, but there are also things that one more thing that they need to do is that they need to make sure the best agencies want to work with them.
Yeah.
So that's where I think the media pitches, like how do we brief an agency, it comes very important. Because just like producing a content or producing an ad, if your brief is to the point, it just captures the right things, then it's the same, and you get a really good, beautiful ad. But for the distribution of that ad, if you correctly pitch the agency and brief the agency, not pitch, but brief the agency in the correct way, then you get better results. That's what I've experienced for 20 years right now.
Yeah, 100%. It's really good advice. And every pitch that we ever run is, we always say to the client side team on the advertiser side, is that often you have to kind of pitch yourself first. Okay, because and it's more important now than ever, because agencies are not prepared to pitch for everything. They are being way more discerning about which brands they will be prepared to pitch for. And that's a good thing, actually, because when you run a pitch, you want agencies to really want to be there and to really want to win. So half the job at the beginning is to get the marketer to commit to, write a really good brief, explain be open and transparent. These are partners you're going to work closely with for the next 3, 5, 10 years. You're going to entrust them with millions of your brand's dollars. Okay. Take some time to do it really, really well. And present yourself in the best possible way. Because the best way of getting the best talent, the best ideas, the best commercial terms, like the best agency showing up and being really competitive, is that they want to work with you. And they're going to want to work with you if you present a realistic idea of what it's actually like and what your objectives are. And we encourage marketers to be really honest. We say, like, what are the worst things? What are you really bad at? How bad could it be?
Exactly. Just one final question before I move on to my last two questions. So it's an interesting approach, right? One last question before the last two. Do you see, like, over which budgets do you see a smaller brand, let's say, over what budget they should start working with an agency? Is it like 100,000? I'm just assuming. I mean, is there like a average that you see in the market?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's not really, because essentially there's an agency that could support all budgets. So agencies don't just have to work with big budgets, but also there's a change in the industry which kind of makes that less important now. Is that historically, and you made a reference to this earlier, it's like, big budgets can get big agencies and they have a lot of money, so they can negotiate better discounts and all of these kind of things. They can utilize the resources of agencies better if you have more money. But that's not really true anymore, or less true. Because as of today, in a market like the US, about 50% of media budgets across all brands is not bought through a negotiation. It's not purchased from a vendor from a discount on rate card in the way that media used to be bought. Like, you'd go and you'd try and buy a spot on a TV channel, or you'd buy a page in a newspaper, or you'd buy a banner on a website. There'd be a rate card of costs, and then you'd maybe use your agencies to try and negotiate those costs down. Now, about 50%, this is a big tipping point now, is that half of our media budgets are now being traded through auctions. And
Yeah.
that's a whole different dynamic of the way to buy and sell media. Because if you think about how an auction works differently, an auction doesn't know how much money we have. And the example I'll give you, which I use often with marketers, is think of eBay. Everybody knows eBay. You can kind of go onto eBay and you can like bid for things that you want to buy. Let's say you and I are both on eBay and we want to buy a new bicycle. Okay. And that bicycle is $50. You may be a billionaire and I may literally just have $50 in my pocket. But if I want that bicycle more, I see more value in it than you, I will win that auction. Just because you can pay more doesn't mean that you will pay more. So an auction creates this perfect supply and demand marketplace that doesn't respect scale at all. So it means that actually smaller brands can be way more competitive now because the whole media is becoming completely democratized. You can go and buy almost anything as a small brand. You just have to decide what to buy. And that is an intelligence that the brands increasingly have inside because they start to know what they buy, what works and what doesn't work. So they can want to buy more of the stuff that works and less of the stuff that doesn't work. It's a continual optimization exercise that we do for a lot of brands, just pointing them to things that work and optimize against those. It doesn't really matter how big you are as a brand. And over time, less and less media is going to be transacted in these large scale based negotiations, and more of it is going to be auction based. So the smarter brands will win. Those with the best data, those able to move quicker, will win.
Thank you so much. At the end, I asked 2 questions to my guests, which is exactly the same questions. If you could recommend one book, what would it be after your search in the shelves?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've listened to the podcast, so I know that you asked this question, so I've come prepared. So there's 3. I'm going to give you 3 books. You can quickly, and you can take your choice. So these are relatively recent books that touch on some media principles that I think are worth reading. One is came out this year. This is Aaron Kumar's book, The Data Deluge. Aaron has just been appointed head of AI at Accenture. He's a very smart guy. And this is full of terrifying stories about how brands do bad things with data, but it's also full of hope. Again, another friend of mine, Shalindar's Marketer's Guide to Digital Advertising, Transparency, Metrics, and Money. Highly recommend. These are quite dense reads, but they're worth it. And then something a little bit lighter, which is quite cool, I think, is Raja's book, Quantum Marketing. You're probably more familiar with that one.
Yeah, I read that before.
Yeah. Which is good. What I love, the kind of stuff that he talks about is the mindset of a marketer, and what you say is really important, and the frameworks that you build and how you communicate to the world what's important sets a tone for so much, which really comes back to everything that we try and do around media.
And what's your favorite place for coffee, either in New York or somewhere in the world?
Oh, it's funny. My kids were asking me this exact question the other day because I was talking about coffee. Well, now I live in America now, and there's this terrible trend here of flavored creamers. If you go into like grocery store, you've probably seen these things, right? And they all look like shampoo bottles. I mean, they're really clearly marketed at a certain demographic, but they've got these weird, wacky flavors, and I don't know why you ruin coffee by putting kind of strange kind of maple bacon flavored pumpkin creamers in your coffee. So I was saying to my kids, we're going to Paris next year. We're taking them to France. I'm like, let's just get to Paris and just let's have a coffee in Paris, or when we go to Italy. So, I mean, I think the best place to drink a coffee is probably, in a square in Italy is probably like one of my favorite places. It tastes good, but it feels good.
Yeah, I know. So like, it looks good. Whole experience is like, feels like you're getting better coffee, even if sometimes the coffee here might be better.
Yeah, I think
Thanks so much for joining me today.
pleasure.
And I hope to see you soon, maybe for a media buying opportunity. Who knows?
Indeed. Very good. It's been a pleasure.